Once upon a time, in a beautiful city, lived a woman whose silence was mistaken for weakness. Her name was Ada, and her husband Chuka was the kind of man who believed that money gave him the right to humiliate others, especially his wife, who did nothing but love him. Chuka worked in a multinational oil servicing firm. His salary was so impressive, his wardrobe intimidating, and his ego larger than life. His wife, Ada, on the other hand, was a full time housewife who stayed at home to care for their kids. She didn't work in an office. She didn't wear heels, as what she wore was duty. Every morning, Ada woke up by 4 in the morning. She prepared breakfast for the family, cleaned up the house, ironed her husband's shirts, and got their daughters ready for school, all before 7 in the morning. Whilst her husband woke up by 7 and got dressed for work, still, he called her lazy and poor. Chuka did not care that his wife always ensured that their daughters did their homeworks correctly. He did not care that they topped their class through the help of their mother. He did not care that his wife held the home together whilst he went out to work. Chuka never saw any of it. To him, his wife Ada was a liability with no ambition, and no matter how much she gave, he always made her feel like a burden. One Saturday evening, Chuka invited 4 of his wealthy friends over for drinks. They wore perfumes that smelled like power and shoes that cost more than Ada's entire wardrobe put together. Ada ushered them in with a humble smile. She served them drinks and disappeared into the kitchen like she always did whenever they came visiting. Ada never sat with them, not because she wasn't allowed, but because every time she tried, something inside her shrunk. Chuka would crack jokes that made her heart bleed beneath her dress. He would narrate how he rescued her from poverty and washed her clean with soap. Chuka never stopped telling anyone that cared to listen that he met his wife barefoot on the street, selling oranges. I should be crowned king of charity, he said to his friends, who all laughed as they had their drinks. Ada heard it all from the kitchen. Her fingers clutched the tray so tightly that her knuckles began to turn white, but she said nothing. She stepped out quietly with the tray of grilled fish that she had made for them. As she was about dropping the fish on the table, her elbow pushed down a glass of wine, pouring it on one of his friends who was all dressed in white. Chuka barked angrily at his wife, calling her a worthless village girl. The room fell silent for a second. Then they all erupted in laughter. Chuka, take it easy now, one said, half laughing, half embarrassed. But Chuka wasn't done. He turned sharply to Ada, his voice sharp enough to slice through her bones. Can't you do one thing right? That is why I tell you to stay in the kitchen. No class, no coordination, just bush behavior everywhere you go. Ada stood there frozen, wine dripping from her hand, her eyes blurry with unshed tears. The man she gave everything to, her youth, her body, her entire life, had just stripped her dignity in front of strangers. The guest in white tried to make light of it. It's okay, madam, it's just wine. But the damage had already been done. Ada slowly turned and walked back into the kitchen, her shoulders heavy, like she was carrying the weight of shame itself. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just quietly sat on a stool and stared at the wall, her ears still ringing with the name that her husband had called her. Worthless village girl. That night, after the guests left and Chuka went to bed, snoring like nothing had happened, Ada walked into the children's room. Her daughters, Emily and Sharon, were fast asleep, their small hands curled into fists as they slept. Ada bent and kissed their cheek as she whispered to them that time had come for her to be the kind of mother that they would be proud of. She tiptoed back into the living room, sat on the cold tiled floor, and picked up her phone. And that night, for the first time in many years, she typed the word into Google, how to start a business with nothing, because Ada had made the decision that she was going to rise right under the roof of the man who called her worthless. It all began with a fabric that she had received as a gift years ago. It was tucked away in a box that Ada had not opened in years. She picked it up and held it to her chest, thinking of what to make with it. She brought out her sewing kit and walked to the living room. The house was completely quiet as Chuka had gone to sleep, snoring with the peace of a man who believed he owned the world. Ada sat on the cold floor as she began to thread her needle. She cut the fabric and began to sew a bag. It was a simple tote bag, stitched with hand, as Ada had no machine to use. It took her a few minutes to finish, and Ada could not hide her excitement. She thought she had forgotten how to sew, seeing that she hadn't sewn since her mother passed away. Ada smiled for the first time in a very long time. The next morning, while buying groceries in the market, Ada carried the bag on her shoulder. A woman stopped and asked where she got the bag, and Ada smiled and revealed to her that she made it herself, and the woman ordered for 3 bags on the spot. Ada could not believe her eyes. She rushed home happily and brought out the remaining of the fabric as she began to cut them carefully. That night, when everyone was asleep, Ada sewed the 3 bags for the woman. By the end of the week, she had made her first 10,000 naira. It wasn't much, but to Ada it was proof. Proof that she was still worth something, even if her husband did not see it. This here was the seed inside of her that Chuka had still not destroyed. She opened a small digital wallet on her phone that she called her Freedom Project. Chuka did not know about it. He was too busy calling her poor that he failed to notice her gifts and abilities, and Ada was no longer just a housewife. She was now a quiet builder who woke up each morning with purpose. One afternoon, Ada set out for the market to buy some fabrics when she caught sight of her husband with another woman driving into a hotel. She was so furious and decided to confront him. When Chuka embarrassed her in front of the strange woman, "How can you say I'm cheating on you with this damsel here? Have you taken a good look at her?" he said to Ada, who he mocked for smelling like a market woman. "Do you know how much this pretty damsel makes in a month?" he said to Ada, who he told that she could never match up with a woman like this. In fact, Chuka in that moment asked her a question that she never saw coming. "Are we even married?" he asked Ada, who stood there and watched as he strolled into the hotel with the strange woman. The ache in her chest throbbed so loudly that she could barely hear the sound around her. Something inside her broke, but not the kind of break that leads to tears. No, this break battered fire, a fire that burned down every atom of fear that was building inside of her. Ada made the decision to succeed. She had taken so much insult from her husband and knew that only her success would be able to shut him up forever. So, she began to wake up each morning with purpose. She woke up by 4 as usual, cooked, cleaned and prepared her daughters for school. Once everyone was out, she brought out her fabrics and began to sew. Ada made as many tote bags as possible. She even began to make new styles, hoping that people liked them, and Ada was so shocked at the rate at which her bags sold out. Word began to spread, and people began to call her the bag woman, a name that her husband used to mock and laugh at her. Ada was not making millions yet, but she knew the potential that lived in her hands. One afternoon, after a school run, she returned to find her fabrics wet outside. It had rained and Chuka threw all the fabrics out in the rain. Ada could not contain her anger. She confronted him, asking why he threw the fabrics in the rain. But Chuka, instead of feeling remorseful, laughed in her face and asked what she was talking about. "Are you talking about those filthy rags?" he asked Ada, who he told to stop embarrassing herself. "If you want to sew, go and learn from real tailors and stop littering my house with cheap fabrics," he said as he walked away, leaving her there in anger. Ada in that moment felt something catch in her throat. It was not sadness or anger. It was something heavier. Something that pushed her to even work harder. She could have cried. She could have screamed. But instead, she took her phone and uploaded pictures of her best bags on Instagram using her mother's name to set up the account. Within 48 hours, she got her first bulk order and was paid a whopping sum of 50,000 naira. All her life, Ada had not made such money before. She began to save the money that she made as she spent her nights sewing and packing customers' orders. The days that followed were one of the best days of her life as orders kept pouring in like rain. Ada finally rented a shop secretly and employed two people who began to help her with the orders. It felt like a miracle as her account balance began to read in six figures. She had never seen such an amount of money in her life, and now, with her bare hands, she had earned it quietly, without begging or asking her wicked husband for a single kobo. And Chuka could not help but notice this. He asked her one evening where she got the money that she used to buy the fabrics. I hope you're not borrowing and disgracing me in this estate, he asked Ada, who smiled and informed him that she was just keeping busy. Busy being broke? He asked her mockingly as he began to laugh at her in her face. That long, sharp, wicked laughter that used to pierce her soul before. But this time, it did not hurt. It only reminded her that her husband still saw her as nothing, and Ada smiled, knowing she was worth more than he could ever imagine. A few days later, Ada received an unexpected visitor. The morning began like every other, quiet, routine, and ordinary. Ada had just returned from dropping her daughters in school. Chuka had gone to work, and the house was completely empty. She heard a knock on the door and went to check who it was when she saw a strange woman standing by her gate. She was in her early 40s, poised, elegant, and beautifully dressed. She wore a fitted Ankara dress with red heels that clicked softly on the pavement. Good morning, she said, smiling as she introduced herself to Ada as Mrs. Thompson. Are you the woman who makes those beautiful tote bags? She asked Ada, who blinked and stared at her in shock. Yes, I am. How did you find me? Ada asked the woman, who revealed to her that she owned a fashion store in town. One of your bags ended up with my cousin, and I've been trying to find you ever since. Your stitching is so clean, simple, and beautiful, she said to Ada, whose hands trembled as she listened to the strange woman, who asked if she would be interested in supplying 300 pieces every month. I can pay up front, the woman said to Ada, who stared at her in disbelief. 300? Ada asked the woman, who smiled and handed her a contract to read and sign. Ada could not believe her eyes. It felt like a dream as she reviewed her first contract. Ada's eyes shone in disbelief as she read through the contract, realizing that the woman was offering her more money for each bag that she made. She signed the contract, and just like that, her first big door opened. Ada had no one to share her excitement with, so she decided to go to a quiet restaurant alone to eat and celebrate her big win. As she sat in the restaurant, sipping a glass of wine alone, a handsome man approached her to ask what she was celebrating. Ada lit up as she told him about her huge contract. The man, whose name was Dozier, joined her to celebrate. They spent hours talking and laughing like old friends who had just met in another life. Dozier was gentle, kind, and deeply interested in Ada's story. He asked her questions like what made her start, and Ada told him everything that happened to her. Dozier did not look at her like a victim. He looked at her like a queen who had built her throne in spite of her challenges. He toasted to her growth, and before he left, he handed her his card saying that if she ever wanted to talk, that he was always available, and Ada tucked the card into her bag as she rushed to go pick her daughters up from school. She arrived home hours later to meet her husband at home with another woman. He had started noticing things, new fabrics in the house, strangers dropping off parcels, as well as more frequent phone calls. The night before, he asked who she was always chatting with and why her phone had suddenly become hotter than a generator, but Ada smiled and said nothing to him. She laughed inside, seeing how clueless he was. If only he knew, she thought to herself, as she watched him accuse her of selling her body to men for money. Ada desperately wanted to scream it out for him to hear, that she was no longer the poor woman that he married. She wanted to let him know that she now had her shit together, but something inside of her stopped her, as if it knew what was about to happen. She stood there stunned to see her bags all packed in the corner as Chuka informed her that he was no longer interested. After all, we were never married, he said to Ada, who for all these years believed that they were married. The first time he said it at the hotel, Ada did not take him seriously, but hearing him say it again, she knew that Chuka had been hiding something from her. But what she did not know was that years ago, Chuka, knowing how naive she was, hired some men and people to act like his family. He also hired a man to act as a pastor as they conducted their marriage in their home. He convinced Ada that the marriage was legit so as to deceive her into living with him for all these years. Little did Ada know that their marriage was fake. She stood there frozen in the doorway as her daughter stood beside her, holding their school bags with confusion in their eyes. Chuka moved her into his guest room, stating that she had to leave his house in a week. I don't care where you go after the week runs out. If you like, move under the bridge, he said to Ada, who he insulted again for being poor. He went on to call her a perpetual beggar, warning her to better pay off all the debt that she was owing the neighbors. And Ada picked up her phone and made a call. Chuka stood there and watched as his wife called the landlord and paid for the flat next door. Ada had had it to her neck. She did not want to spend one more day in his house, and Chuka stood there frozen to see his wife pay millions on the spot to rent the vacant flat next to his own. He could not understand how she had such money with her and began to call her a prostitute who hid behind selling bags to sell her body to men. But Ada ignored him completely as she began to move her things to her flat. Her daughters joined her as they all moved into the flat next door. Chuka became restless. He expected Ada to be helpless and sad, but Ada did not for once cry or shed a tear. She did not beg him to stay. She did not even raise her voice. Instead, she paid for the flat next door and moved on as if Chuka did not exist, and Chuka could not believe his eyes. Instead of enjoying his house with his new woman, Chuka began to peep out of the window to see what she was up to. He would spend hours monitoring her every movement to see the man behind her success. One day, he confronted a delivery man who came to pick up some packages from Ada, believing that he was the one behind all the money that she had. But the delivery man looked at him confused, saying that he admired Madam Ada so much for all that she had achieved for herself. It was then that the delivery man told him about her brand, Helen's Totes, which Chuka never knew existed. Oga, I'm here to do my job. I'm just a delivery man who Madam Ada gave a job after years of being unemployed. Madam Ada is a woman that any man will be lucky to have, he said to Chuka, who watched him walk to his van and drive away. Chuka immediately rushed to Instagram to search for Helen's Totes. To his surprise, the account had over 100,000 followers, with celebrities and influencers talking about the unique designs that she made. Chuka could not believe how big Ada had become. The same Ada, who he called useless and worthless, had now risen from the ashes like a phoenix. She now attended fashion shows and rode with a class of people that even him dreamed of meeting. Her videos had gone viral, where she talked about the suffering that brought her to where she was now, and Chuka stood there broken to realize that he was the suffering she was talking about. He dropped his phone to realize that Ada was now a star, and the worst part was that she did it without him. That night, Chuka could not sleep. His new girlfriend, seeing how obsessed he was with Ada, packed out of the house the next morning. But Chuka did not care. All he wanted at this point was the woman that he sent away. The woman who was not only the best mother to his beautiful daughters, but also the woman who had quietly built an empire beneath his nose. For days, Chuka battled with his thoughts. He no longer ate well or stepped out, as shame clung to him like a wet cloth. The house, once filled with pride and ego, now echoed with regret, and Chuka could not take it any longer. One morning, he decided to make things right with Ada. He wore a clean shirt, sprayed his best perfume, and marched over to her flat. With shaky hands, he knocked on the door, and one of his daughters opened the door. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" she asked curiously, as Chuka informed her that he wanted to see her mother. As Chuka looked up into the apartment, he saw something that shattered his heart into a million pieces. Ada was standing in the distance as a handsome young man was proposing to her. Chuka stood there and watched as Ada accepted to be his wife. He flared up in anger as he approached the man to say that Ada was already his wife. "How dare you try to marry my wife?" he asked the man angrily as he threw a punch at him, warning him to stay away from Ada. Chuka stormed out of the flat in anger, his knuckles aching from the punch, his voice still loud with insults as he screamed at Ada to remember that she was still his wife. But Ada said nothing as she watched him disappointedly, shocked that he would do such a thing in front of his daughters. That same morning, Chuka got dressed and headed for the office. His face was still red with anger as he did not greet anyone, not even the receptionist, who greeted him but received no response. Chuka marched straight to his office, slamming the door behind him. He could not believe that Ada was about to marry another man. He called up his friend Tony to know if he was in his office, and Tony told him that he had just gotten out of a meeting. Chuka walked angrily to Tony's office to rant when he caught sight of the man who he punched in Ada's house earlier that morning. Chuka had no idea that the man that he punched was the son of his boss. He stood there frozen to realize that Ada had just been engaged to his boss's son Dozier, the same man she met at the restaurant the day that she secured her first big contract. Chuka, in that moment, watched his world crumble before his eyes. He stood there at the doorway of Tony's office, frozen like a statue, as he watched Dozier, yes, the same man he had punched that morning, laugh and shake hands with Tony, his friend, who was also the company's top executive. Chuka, Tony called, surprised to see him standing there confused. Come meet Dozier, our boss's son. He just got engaged today to a wonderful woman named Ada. Tony had no idea that the Ada they were talking about was the same Ada that they all laughed at in Chuma's house, the same Ada who they mocked. Chuka's lips trembled. Ada, he repeated. Yes, Ada, a beautiful woman with a strong spirit, the owner of Helen's Totes. Her bags are everywhere now. She's going to handle our next corporate branding event, Tony said with pride, not knowing what his words were doing to Chuka. Dozier smiled politely at Chuka and added, Yes, Ada is my fiancée. She's an amazing woman. You'd be lucky to meet someone like her in your lifetime, he said mockingly as he walked away. Chuka could no longer stand. His knees gave way as he slumped into the chair by the door. Tony rushed to him to ask what was happening, and Chuka revealed to him that the Ada they were all talking about was his wife. Tony could not believe his ears. For all these years, they looked down at Ada, not knowing the potential that she carried. Ada had become everything he said she could never be, and Chuka could not understand how. That night, Chuka returned to his house miserable. It felt empty and haunted. He looked out of the window and saw Ada playing with his daughters, who he did not know how to face after what happened that morning. Chuka, in that moment, realized that Ada was not just rich in money, she was now rich in peace, joy, strength, and love. Chuka, who once laughed at her and called her poor, now sat alone with his head in his hands, because what Ada ordered to the house was her own freedom, success, and happiness, and this was brought to shut Chuka up forever. A few days later, Chuka received an email at work that made his hand shake. It was from the head office, informing him of a meeting that he had to face for assaulting the boss's son Dozier. He stared at it, hoping it was a mistake, but it wasn't. Everyone in the office already knew. Whispers followed him in the hallway. People who used to greet him now looked away. Chuka was suspended immediately, pending investigation, and a week later, a letter came informing him that he had been fired. Just like that, his powerful job, his title, the company car, the respect, all fizzled into thin air. The man who used to boast about being the breadwinner, the king of the house, now sat in his empty throne, alone, his pride broken. Outside his window, he watched Ada pull up in a new black SUV with her brand logo boldly printed on the side. Her daughters ran into her arms as she laughed and carried them into her apartment. Chuka sat there alone. No job, no wife, no joy, and for the first time in his life, he wept like a child. He finally understood what he had lost. Not just a woman, but a rare woman who rose from his insults and built a throne from his ashes. The lesson to be learned from this story is that you should never look down on someone because of where they are today. Ada's quiet strength, humility, and perseverance prove that true value isn't found in loud wealth or flashy status, but in character, purpose, and determination. Chuka mistook Ada's silence for weakness and mocked her because she didn't earn a salary, forgetting that some seeds grow slowly but blossom powerfully. His laughter turned to regret when he realized too late that the woman he belittled was the same woman that the world would later celebrate. Respect your partner, no matter how small their beginnings may seem, because the person you laugh at today may be the one